In my previous video, I installed the core support, which included the radiator, AC condenser, the fan radiator shroud, the battery box here on the passenger side, as well as the inner skirt. And I just now removed that because I am going to work next on the exhaust downpipe that comes out of the turbo. So I know that there's a lot of videos on YouTube about how to cut this out and replace it with a new aftermarket downpipe. But not many of these videos have this big gaping hole on the side of their truck, which gives you great access to cut the old one out as well as install the new. So I thought I'd take advantage of the fact that I do have this gaping hole and work on this before I get any further with reassembly of the engine bay. So after a little bit of shopping and comparing, I decided to go with the Diamond Eye brand of downpipe. Didn't really want to overthink this. There's good reviews, there's a lot of videos regarding this brand. The downpipe is really a pretty simplistic replacement. There's two pieces of pipe to help for the installation. One pipe is really almost impossible to get into the space, and it comes with a clamp. The other brands, or at least one other brand, comes with a band clamp, which is probably one improvement over the U-bolt clamp here. There's also the flange that then bolts up against the stock exhaust. Here's the original exhaust, and I took this off a few weeks ago, and I'm not planning to reuse this other than I thought it would be useful to keep this flange, which bolts up nicely to the downpipe. So I'm going to reuse this, and then I also like this 3-inch to 4-inch transition. And so my plan is to cut it off here at the catalytic converter, clean this transition piece up, and then get some 4-inch pipe and build my exhaust. So here's a great view right down on top of the frame, looking into the back of the engine, and here is the heat shield that's wrapped over the stock downpipe. So you can see it's nice and loose. You've got 4 of these little bands to clip, and then the heat shield is now loose. Then I can go ahead and pull that out, and then that'll expose my pipe, and I can go ahead and find a spot to cut that in half. So there's the 2 halves of the heat shield removed, and it had a total of 5 of these little metal bands, and I just used a side cutter, and those came out really easy. And again, here's the same view again of the pipe, and I'm going to cut it in here somewhere where I can get easy access with a Sawzall, and I'm just going to cut it in half and pull the 2 halves out. All right, here I've got my Sawzall set up with my blade. And now I'm going to perform some delicate surgery. So I did run into a little problem, and then I ran out of room with my other Sawzall, so I just have a little bit more to cut, and I'll do it with my battery power Milwaukee. Okay, well, I've got the 2 pieces cut in half now. So there's the old downpipe, giant metal tapeworm, and where I cut it was almost perfect. So 1 slice and the 2 halves were easy to pull out. So before I start bending anything, I put the new pipe in place just to see where it was tight against the firewall, so I kind of know where to start as far as bending. But it already slips in there fairly easy. I know where my tight spot is now, and I can start making some more room by compressing it against the firewall. So it's hard to see, but this is a light heat shield in here, and the very top edge has some rivets where it actually rivets to the seam of the cab. And when I say seam, there's a seam of the cab right here that wraps into the firewall. And so this is actually where it's tight inside here. But there's also a lot of space to be gained with this heat shield. So what I'm gonna do is this top edge, I'm gonna fold it back over itself, and then I can push this back underneath that seam of the cab and up against the firewall and get that out of my way. Then it's just the seam of the cab that I either need to maybe make a couple of cuts on the inside here or get a big bar and just bend it in to make space for my pipe. So you can see from the top side, I've got my upper pipe in place, and I did install this from the top side down. So you can see it's got a lot of room to move around. I'll put my band on there. I'll let the pipe relax a little bit in its comfortable place, and then I'll clamp it down. This is on the bottom side, and it took a little bit of persuasion to get it to go, but on the bottom side I just used a little bar to get the bottom edge past this spot right here it wanted to catch on the transmission on that bolt. And then as you can see, I didn't have to butcher the cab much at all. So the heat shield here that my hand is on, you can see it's very thin, and like I showed before, there's a few rivets that hold it into place on this upper seam of the cab, and I took those rivets off, and I just took the upper edge of this heat shield and I bent it back over itself. And then getting the pipe in place, there's actually plenty of room. Like I said, from the top side, you can see the pipe bobbling around. So it's not like I had to wedge it between the engine and the cab. It's got plenty of room. It just needed a little bit of persuasion to go from the upside. I used a hammer from the top side, and then, like I said, it did want to catch on the bolt here, and then there's another place it wanted to catch. So again, having the fender out of the way was just the perfect scenario, because I could tap from the top side and then use a bar on the bottom side and get it past these places where it wanted to catch. Well, there is the downpipe clamped in place on the turbo. And here it is from the underside. I do have a PTO, power takeoff, on this truck, and it still has plenty of room. But there is the end with the flange. So like I said, I was going to take that 3-inch to 4-inch transition off the stock exhaust system, and I will use that to then extend the new exhaust, which I plan to do just straight pipe. But there's the clamp, and it's not quite tight. I'll just wait until I get my exhaust on the truck, and then I'll do my final adjustments, and then I'll tighten everything down nice and snug. So overall, I will say that I give a lot of credit to you guys that put in those downpipes from the top side of the engine bay without having the hole that I do here with the fender off. So it was still quite a bit of work doing it solo, but as I stated before, it was mostly that heat shield that I needed to move. There's not a lot of other surgery that's necessary on the actual cab seam or cab structure itself. But it does take a little bit of persuasion to get that top pipe in from the top side and get it into place. But once it's in place, there's plenty of room around the pipe against the engine and the cab that it fits in there with a little bit of room, a little bit of slack, so it's not tight up against your cab. So again, this was a good install. It took me probably about an hour total, but again, I will say it was super convenient having that fender off, and if you had the chance to put in a downpipe when the engine bay is completely apart, I highly recommend it. So before I close this video, here is the transition piece with the flange cut off of my old exhaust. So I just kind of hacked it off. I'll probably true up that edge with a chop saw, but I left the hanger on since it was welded on nice. But this is the piece that will get bolted up against the downpipe, and then I will build my exhaust off of that. And here's that transition installed onto the flange of the downpipe. So now I'm ready to take just a standard 4-inch piece of exhaust pipe and weld it onto the end here, and then route it to the back of the truck.